Hi, you're awesome, you know that? Yeah, you are great. I'm glad to welcome you to Real Tales and Trails, where we blow your mind with amazing stories. So, expect another really interesting and captivating story. Let's begin. See you at the end.
The Lantern of Wraith Hollow. In a forgotten corner of the countryside, there's a place known to the locals as Wraith Hollow. It's a dense, dark forest where even the bravest souls dare not tread after nightfall. The trees stand twisted and gnarled, their branches like bony fingers reaching out to the sky. And in the heart of the hollow, there's an old, decaying cabin, long abandoned, but with an eerie, persistent glow flickering from within on moonless nights. The story of Wraith Hollow is a tale passed down through generations, whispered around campfires and shared in hushed voices. They say the glow that shines from the cabin is the lantern of the Wraith, a restless spirit bound to the forest, cursed to wander for eternity. The legend goes like this. Long ago, there lived a man named Thomas who was drawn to the deep woods of Wraith Hollow. He was a skeptic, a man of reason, who believed that nothing in the world was truly beyond explanation. But one night, under the cover of darkness, Thomas ventured into the forest, determined to prove that the stories were just that, stories. He set off toward the cabin, lantern in hand, dismissing the warnings of those who spoke of the haunted woods. As he walked deeper into the hollow, the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees seemed to whisper, but Thomas only quickened his pace, determined not to let the stories rattle him. The path was narrow and overgrown, the once clear trail now swallowed by creeping vines and thorns. But he pressed on, the light of his lantern flickering in the dense fog. When he finally reached the cabin, a sense of unease washed over him. The structure was more dilapidated than he expected, its wooden frame twisted and rotting. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dark, empty room. The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves outside. Still, Thomas was unfazed. He set his lantern down and began to search the cabin, convinced there was nothing to fear. But as the hours passed, something began to shift. The air grew colder, and the flickering light of the lantern cast strange, warped shadows on the walls. It was then that he heard it, a soft whisper, so faint he almost thought he imagined it. But no, it came again, clearer this time, as though someone was calling his name from deep within the walls of the cabin. Thomas. His heart skipped a beat, and he turned sharply, but there was no one there. He laughed nervously, trying to brush off the growing sense of dread creeping up his spine. But then, a chill ran down his neck, and he saw it, just for a moment, a faint figure standing in the corner of the room, shrouded in darkness. The figure was tall and thin, its features hidden, but its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. The whisper came again, but now it was no longer just a voice. It was a presence, something ancient and sorrowful, yet filled with a terrible hunger. Thomas. You shouldn't have come. In a panic, Thomas grabbed his lantern and fled the cabin. But as he stepped into the moonlight, the fog thickened around him. The path, which had once been clear, seemed to stretch endlessly before him, twisting and turning in impossible ways. Every step he took seemed to bring him further into the heart of the hollow, the shadows pressing in on all sides. Behind him, the lantern light flickered violently, casting grotesque, contorted shapes on the trees. And that's when he heard it, footsteps. Soft, but distinct. The sound of something following him. He dared not look back. His heart raced, his breath shallow and fast, but the footsteps kept pace with his own. He stumbled forward, desperation clawing at him, the sound of the footsteps growing louder, closer. And then, in the distance, he saw it, the lantern glow. The same lantern he had left behind in the cabin, now floating in mid-air, drifting toward him, casting an eerie, flickering light that made the shadows dance like tortured spirits. Turn back, Thomas. He couldn't stop. His legs carried him, though his body begged him to stop. He could feel the presence now, close enough to touch. The whisper was no longer a voice. It was a breath on the back of his neck, warm and damp. The cold of death. The lantern bobbed in front of him, like a lure, drawing him closer to whatever waited in the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went still. The footsteps stopped. The whisper ceased. Thomas stood frozen, surrounded by a complete silence that was worse than the noise. The lantern hovered before him, and as his shaking hand reached out to grasp it, he saw the face of the wraith. It was not the face of a man, but a hollow, empty shell, like skin stretched over bone. The eyes, black pits of nothing, stared directly into his soul. And in that moment, Thomas understood. The lantern was not guiding him out, it was trapping him, pulling him into the wraith's eternal prison. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was the lantern, floating above him, casting its ghastly light over a new shadow that began to form behind him, a shadow that looked just like him. They say now that on moonless nights, the lantern can still be seen in Wraith Hollow, glowing faintly in the distance. And those brave enough to enter, drawn by the promise of answers or the hope of escape, vanish just like Thomas, leaving only whispers in the wind, calling out to the next poor soul who dares to listen. So, if you ever find yourself wandering the woods at night, and you catch a glimpse of a light flickering through the trees, remember this: it's not a guiding light, it's a warning. If you follow it, you may never return. And you might just become part of the legend of Wraith Hollow.
Welcome back. That was an awesome story. I hope you really enjoyed it and learned a great lesson. Please don't forget to subscribe so you be the first to know when we upload new stories. Please subscribe to Real Tales and Trails. Subscribe at Real Tales and Trails. Thank you and see you in our next story.